and have never been late to my sessions. But unfortunately, switching from a canned broadcast to a live broadcast requires, just twiddling with these buttons with which I'm not familiar with. I shall immediately cut to the chase, which is that AKP and its partner MHP, partner in the Grand Assembly, are melting like snowflakes on hot asphalt. Both parties are losing ground, and this has important implications for both economic policy and Turkey's political future. In terms of economic policy, I believe Mr. Erdogan's last chance to regain his popularity is to just a second. I'm really need to. Mr. Erdogan's last chance to regain his popularity is to revive the economy as quickly as possible, possibly within the summer months, and increase national income, which would obviously decrease unemployment and bring back consumption, thus creating a virtuous cycle. The same thing is true for MHP, which seems to have firmly chained its future on Erdogan's success. Therefore, economic policies over the summer months would become extremely growth oriented, and health concerns will be pushed to the back burner. Politically speaking, obviously, if Mr. Erdogan cannot regain his credibility, there are several options. A, to increase the ongoing crackdown and suppression of dissidents and opposition parties to stay in power until 2023, when regularly scheduled elections will be held, and hope that in the interim this COVID pandemic would go away and the world economies would go back to the normal. The second option, of course, is to call snap elections, which I have described in a video, and it is my most likely scenario, simply because even though AKP strategic thinkers adhere to a different school of political thought and economic thought than we mainstream economists do, they must understand that the risk of losing whatever poll support they have left in the next 3 years would far outweigh the potential benefits from waiting. Therefore, this is a crucial moment for Turkish economy as well as politics. So allow me to explain what is happening in the polls. I'm really sorry for this halting speech because currently I am sort of like at the command post of a spaceship with so many things just moving and vibrating and giving red and green signals to me. I really don't know what to do. Okay, let me show you the first chart here. These are produced by our team and Turkey Data Monitor, therefore it's licensed to us. As you see, one of my hobbies is to collect polls as soon as they are revealed to the public. And here you see 9 different polling agencies which have announced their results March 2020 through June 2020. Some of the, agencies have, of course, conducted more than one poll. For instance, Metropol and Istanbul Economic Araştırma, which means Istanbul Economic Research. But the interesting thing, or what I really like about this table, is that obviously, as those of you who live in Western countries would know, averaging polls usually yields better predictive outcomes than taking just any one poll. 2, specific to this table, it represents polling agencies from all sorts of political viewpoints. I don't want to name them. They may not agree with my definition of their political orientation, but we have center left, independent or impartial or politically neutral, as well as pro-AKP polling agencies here. So this is a good mix, and even a pro-Kurdish, I believe, agency, which has mainly polled the south and southeastern provinces of Turkey. So this is a very good mix of what the a good representation of what the reality might be in the arena. And this is raw data in the sense that the tradition in the world is there is usually a certain percentage of those who are polled who would not answer the questions, or who would say, I shall not vote, or who will say, well, I'm undecided at this point. Time will show. This is the raw data. And then in a second table I'm going to show to you, the raw data will be distributed according to the raw votes of parties. So, pro rata, as we call it. What we see here is that AKP has declined to 32% and MHP to 8.3%, whereas there is a large number of undecideds who will, as always, the swing voters, decide the fate of the next election. Before I start speculating on who these undecideds are and how they are likely to vote, let me show you, the second table here, which is pretty much the same agencies, same polls, but this time those who said I won't vote or I'm undecided have been distributed to parties. Even here, the sum of AKP plus MHP votes, MHP is here, 10.2, amounts to 49.1. Now you may say that's fairly close to 50%, but I think in the last general election their combined vote was over 52%, so there's a significant decline here. Now let me get back to reasons as to why I think these undecideds may not vote for AKP MHP, or that distributing them pro rata among the parties may not be the best practice. First of all, we have a separate poll from Metropole Agency, also shown on these tables, who tried to understand the behavior of undecideds by asking them how loyal to their parties. Strangely enough, contrary to the recent past, the party loyalty among AKP constituencies is as low as 60%. If Metropole is watching, I apologize if I'm making a mistake. It's in 60s. No party has 100% voter loyalty, but the other parties are at least 10 percentage points above that. So this shows that a lot of AKP voters are only marginally attached to their parties, or are waiting for something, or are concerned about something. My answers as to what they are waiting is they're waiting for an economic recovery, because AKP, beside its ideology and political stance, has also brought continuous per capita GDP growth to Turkey. That magic essentially ended in 2016 after the aborted coup attempt. Some might say in 2018, but it doesn't make a difference. Over the last few years, AKP's performance, instead of putting more money in the citizens' pockets or more bread on the table, has been tarnished. And of course, in the first half of the year, it has received a massive blow. One of the reputable think tanks in Turkey, called Betam Research Agency, expects the second quarter GDP to decline by 7.5 percentage points in annualized terms. And obviously, to the extent there's a positive correlation between AKP's votes and GDP growth, AKP will suffer. So I think these voters would wait over the summer months whether AKP keeps its promise of reinvigorating the economy. If Mr. Erdogan and his right hand man, Mr. Berat Albayrak, fail in this exercise, then they will gravitate to other parties. Uh, which parties would they gravitate? Now, previously, there was no other party at a broad swath of political territory which was represented by AKP, namely center right, liberal right, as well as Islamist right. Now there are rivals, Mr. Ali Babacan's Deva party and Mr. Ahmet Davutoğlu's Future Party. Mr. Ali Babacan used to be former economy czar under Erdogan, and Mr. Davutoğlu used to be former prime minister. Both have had their fallings out with AKP and decided to split and form their own parties. Let me go back to the previous table. As you see, this GP, Davutoğlu Party, and DP, Babacan Party, are currently barely registering in the polls. Mr. Davutoğlu's party receives 1.7% of the national vote, and Mr. Babacan's party is 2.2% of the national vote. But there are 16% undecideds. And if these people, as I claim, are largely former AKP voters or voters who tend to vote for AKP in the last minute, their migration to Ali Babacan and Davutoğlu's parties would spell disaster for Mr. Erdogan and AKP. Remember, Mr. Erdogan won the last presidential elections again with something like 52% of the vote. So even a 3% swing towards the opposition would potentially mean he could lose the presidential election. Would they switch to Deva and future parties by Mr. Ahmet Davutoğlu? Yes, Istanbul Economic Research. Well, a lot of polling agencies, if you talk to them, obviously in the press, I don't talk to them personally, are telling us that voter dynamics have started to shake. There is an earthquake, former walls between opposing camps are breaking down, new identifiable voter groups are emerging, such as concerned conservatives. These are urban dwellers who are middle class or upper class, who generally vote for AKP, but now have their second thoughts. The youth vote, which is distinguishable from the rest of the country, because the youth receive their information and political orientation largely through the social media. And in the social media, there is fierce competition for traffic and for audience viewership. It appears that in social media, Mr. Babacan is extremely popular, and CHP's mayors, Mr. Mansur Yavaş, Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu in Istanbul are extremely popular. So, coupled with the rising youth unemployment and dropout ratios, this voter segment, which could reach 20% of total electorate by 2023, could migrate en masse to Deva and Gelecek, or to the main opposition party at center left, CHP, depending on which performs better. But the point is, the other parties may not be able to pool voters. It is Mr. Erdogan's economic failure which might push voters to other camps. Now, clearly, Mr. Erdogan has other shortcomings. I mean, he has engaged Turkey in several adventures abroad, such as Syria, Iraq, and Libya. He's not very keen on democracy. He's a very authoritarian person, like Bolsonaro and Putin, and to a certain extent, Trump. He doesn't have much of a mercy for the opposition, etc., etc. But one has to be realistic. The golden rule of politics, it's the economy, stupid. Few incumbents would lose elections or call early elections if the economy is growing rapidly and the income is trickling down to the poor and lower income classes. This is also true for Turkey. Mr. Erdogan may have many failures and shortcomings, but if he puts more bread on the table, he will be re-elected. So this summer is extremely crucial. This video is not about Turkey's economic conditions, but you can check my previous videos. I've commented enough. Even though obviously data shows a recovery in progress in May and June, as it does almost everywhere, Turkey is a long distance away from reaching its pre-COVID-19 crisis health. Again, I shall prove this point in an upcoming video, but the assertion or the conjecture I'm making here is that AKP will not be able to bring back economic prosperity. And then, if you take my word for it, come fall, autumn months, Mr. Erdogan will have two choices. Will he call snap elections, or will he try to stamp down on the opposition and try to last through 2023, hoping that the economy will get better? He seems to be employing a mix of those policies. On one hand, even though the party is vehemently opposed to it, we understand that AKP rank and file and provincial organizations are being put on high alert and asked to canvass potential voters to find out what's bothering them. Mr. Erdogan is also employing a fair degree of brute force here. For instance, for the last few days, Turkey's attorneys, lawyers, have been on the march because the rules for elections to bar associations will be amended in a way that would decrease the influence of liberal and center-left bar members in favor of those who support AKP. Mr. Erdogan has sent the police to intimidate these people. There has been some skirmishes, some very ugly scenes, but at the end, the lawyers achieved what they wanted to, which is a symbolic protest in Ankara and where people usually go in our capital, to the mausoleum of our founding father, Mr. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. In other cities, they marched too. Pro-Kurdish party HDP marched from several cities to Istanbul to protest the sacking of two of their deputies and several of their mayors. Once again, there were some ugly scenes, some police interference, but all in all, it seems clear to me Mr. Erdogan doesn't have the heart or has the decency not to employ massive suppression tactics to stop the opposition. He is also trying to control the social media by preparing a law to increase censorship, but the social media is notoriously difficult to censor or control. Essentially, for an authoritarian, there are two choices. A, you're going to ignore what people are saying. B, you're going to do as China and Iran does and completely wall your internet from the rest of the world, which in Turkey's case is too difficult and time consuming. As far as I'm concerned, Turkey is heading for early elections because Mr. Erdogan is a very clever political operator and has a very good sense of what the public wants. I think he will realize by autumn that the economic prosperity is not coming back, and he is more likely to lose in 2023 than if he calls snap elections. But I may be wrong. In this case, we're going to have rising social unrest, more political suppression, and years of economic stagnation in Turkey. All in all, this is essentially not a good case outlook. And briefly speaking, I expect AKP and MHP do better in June and July polls because the economy will be showing some improvement. But as of August, they will see that their poll numbers are going down like a Led Zeppelin irreversibly. That's when the manure will hit the fan and Turkey will have to make a choice between elections or, you know, social strife. This has been a live broadcast of Real Turkey channel, rushed and late, presented by Mr. Atilla Yeşillar. I want to thank everyone for watching us, and I hope you would share this so that we can increase our audience and reflect the true political and economic agenda of Turkey to the entire world. Bye bye now.